Today, we're going to be fixing the collar roll on this suit jacket. Stop me if you've heard this one before. You've got a suit jacket, but when you turn to the profile in the mirror, you can see this puckering of fabric coming up right there, just across the top of the shoulders here, but you can see it, it's obvious. We call that a collar roll, like a roll of extra fabric that doesn't need to be there. So in this procedure, we're gonna figure out how to take that out and reset the collar a little bit lower so that we can move that fabric up into the collar and smooth out that back. So we're gonna start by diving right in. We've got the collar flipped up, and I'm looking at the back of the jacket here, and we're actually just going to start at the shoulder seam and begin removing the collar entirely all the way across the back to the matching shoulder seam. So let's get ripping. Okay, so typically you'll have kind of a combination of zigzag stitches, straight stitches. Some are decorative, some are functional, and we are gonna find out which is which by just beginning to open them all. So I'm kind of going right at the edge here, and we do really wanna be careful here because this is a delicate, very visible area of the suit jacket, and we're gonna need for all of this to look exactly the same when we put it back later. So we're also kind of keeping note of the amount of stitches that we're cutting, the lines of stitching that we're cutting, and just sort of how it's been put together here. Now, as we cut the first few stitches, we can already start to see some of that canvas underneath. Canvas is one of the secret weapons of a suit jacket that is holding everything structurally in place and really making everything look smooth and sharp. And the collar is a big part of that, so of course, there we go. We can just start to see that, but we can also see that there's another stitch holding that in place. Okay, there we go. So as I cut that one, now we're really getting into that internal structure. This piece that we're working on, that the stitching is attached to, is almost always felt. In this case, it's a matching black felt because this is the tuxedo jacket, but other suit jackets may choose a contrast color felt, like a pretty red or blue or orange, something that when the collar is lifted, kind of shows up, sort of flashy, kind of a decorative, fun thing. Burberry is known for that, actually. They like to put plaid on their felt under their suit jacket collars. I kind of love that. And if all of your colors, thread, and fabrics are matching, then it's a little bit tricky to see here. We also want to be careful that we're not pulling the fabric too hard, because in this area, some of the fabric is cut on the bias, so it's not on straight grain and really susceptible to being kind of warped out of its shape. So again, this is kind of a delicate, slow procedure that we want to take a lot of time on. Good. I'm also pulling all of these little threads that I'm cutting out as we're going, because I don't want them to be in my way later when I come back to put the stitching in. I want everything to be really nice and clean, so I don't want those threads getting caught up in my new stitching. All right, we are just past the center back now. So heading on over. Really important though, we do want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on where we are cutting, because if you do go past that shoulder seam, you're immediately getting into the front lapels, which do not need to be altered, and putting those back and resetting that stitching can be a challenge. So keep an eye on where you are at in the garment as we're going here. Good. You'll notice that I'm also starting to see my lining, which is on the inside of the garment. Oop, and our little tag that was right at the collar just came off, which is fine. That's not a big deal. Good. Awesome. All right. Now that I've got everything opened up, I'm gonna pull out one of my very favorite tools. My little ham. I have had this ham, that's what it's called, H-A-M, Tailor's ham. I have had this ham, it was one of the first things in the sewing sphere world that I was gifted by my aunt. She got this for me. She was like, oh, your mom said you were getting into this, so I don't know what it's for, but maybe you'll put it to use. And here we are, 1,000 years later. Same little ham. Okay, now, this is really great. I'm putting this on top on this little raised surface because it's kind of mimicking a neck for me right now. And I want it slightly raised off the table and the lapels coming down in front. Now, see how we can see our previous stitching there? That's good, because that's going to help us draw in our new line. Now, how do we decide how much we want to lower the collar by, i.e. how much of this fabric we want to get rid of? Just to recap, we're looking at the back of the jacket here, and when the customer is wearing this, imagine that this is the pinch of fabric that I'm able to pinch with my fingers, that we're trying to smooth out through the collar to decrease wrinkling horizontally across the top of the shoulder blade. So again, that is what we're referencing when we say collar roll. Roll of fabric coming under the collar across the shoulder blades. Good. Okay. Now, zooming back in here, I'm just getting these little threadies out of the way so that they are not getting caught up. Okay, I'm going to put one chalk line right here to help us remember where our stitching originally was. Now, I am never going to take this procedure more than a 1/2 inch down. That's really important because this curve, the curve of the collar, is not cut on grain, and it can easily warp and change the fit of the rest of the upper lapels, even shoulders, the entire upper area of the suit jacket. So this is a challenging procedure because it really can have a huge effect everywhere else, and we are going to be cutting fabric out of this collar, which means we can't put it back, so it's for keeps on this one. So now I'm going to come down 1/2 inch on my center back right there and put a mark. I'm using my wax Tailor's chalk, by the way, so we'll steam all of this out later. So then I'm going to merge this line up to nothing or 0 at my shoulder seam. And I am going to just draw that in until I like the new curve. And I do. That looks beautiful. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. 0 at the shoulder, curving down along to meet up with our center back seam. Okay, and then you can steam out any lines, like right there, that don't quite fit what we're going for. But that's good. Okay, that's really cool. So now, let's open this up a little bit so that you can see the inside. That is what we have already cut there, you see? Oh, don't mind that. That is what we have already cut there. This lining is still tacked into the collar. That's fine. We're going to come back out again. And I think we will want to remove that line of stitching. The reason is because we are trying to move this collar down, so we don't want to keep holding it in place. Yeah, you see how that lining is caught still in the collar? We don't want that. So we are going to remove that stitching. All collars are a little bit different. There we go. All collars are a little bit different, so you may or may not have this many lines of stitching. That's okay. The general procedure is the same. It's just the matter of how far down you need to go. Okay, now I am going to pin the lining here to the back of my jacket. All right, you can see that I've got my outer and my lining all detached from the sections of my collar. The next thing that I want to do before I go any further is release this little band. This band is a little bit of fabric that helps the curved collar and the curved fabric at the collar maintain its stability. So it's kind of like a collar stay, basically. I am going to remove the stitching. There's just a single line of stitching holding that in place because we're going to move that down to where our chalk line is. And that's going to help us keep a nice, stable, secure curve on that collar. Because again, that area of the collar is cut on the bias. It's not cut on the straight grain. So it needs something to help it maintain its structure, maintain its stability. And that is what this little, usually it's like a cotton twill or any kind of internal, banding. Used around necklines, used around armholes, anywhere that's got a tight curve in woven fabric that needs a little bit of support so that it won't get warped over wear and use over time. Ooh, there we go. Good, good, good. All right, awesome. Now, I see my little chalk right there. So now I'm going to move that down. And bam, there it is. Perfect. All right. Next step, I'm going to turn the jacket kind of vertically perpendicular to me. And now we do have to do a little bit of cutting. So I am just going to use my little snippers here and very gently remove just less than a half an inch. So again, keeping our band out of the way, I have it pinned lower down on that center back seam, and our lining and collars are both out of the way. Now we are ready to cut. Now, you may be wondering, why can't I just shove all of that extra fabric up inside the collar? What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that typically then it will not mold to the neck and shoulders of the customer, which completely defeats the purpose. So we need it to move, we need it to curve around the tight neck curve. And so unfortunately, we really do need to cut that fabric out to give it the opportunity to do that. Not very much, but significant. Okay. I'm going to go back under so that I can finish pinning this neckband in place, and then we're going to baste that back on before we get the rest of the collar put back together. So why don't you meet me over at the sewing machine and we'll get that put back on. So we're over here at the machine and I'm just lining up my band. Now my chalk is on the underside, so we are guessing here, but again, we're just trying to get it close to where that new seam is going to be. It's still going to provide stability even if it's not exactly on line. And I'm not backstitching, I'm basting at a 3.5, almost 4 stitch width or stitch length. And just trying to make sure I'm not running over any of my pins. And I'm moving a lot because this collar is a tight curve. So I'm moving the fabric and the pieces a lot as I go. There we go. Okay. And if I cut off that extra little bit of tail there. Okay, cool. So you can see where I just put that in. Like I said, not exactly straight, but that's okay because here on that chalk line, I can see I'm still going to be hitting that band, and that's good. Okay, let's get back over to the hem up on our iron, and we're gonna actually pin this collar back in place on our new line. Here we are. I've got my ham under my collar again, functioning as kind of that neck. And now, what I'm gonna do is set not the internal collar, but the felt and horsehair down all the way to my chalk line. Let's remark that chalk line so it's really clear and you can really see it. There we go. So I'm gonna push that down like that and put a pin in it. Now, you'll notice that I started at the center back seam. That's really important because I want the amount of fabric on either side to be even, and I want that to be the lowest point, and then we're merging up from there. So I'm always going to start at the center back seam, and I am pushing the under collar away as I'm placing this. That's really important. So maybe I need to reach under there so that I can push it out of the way. Great. And one more. Good. And then we're going to move this direction as well. There we go. There we go. This is probably one of the trickier parts, is actually getting it placed. Then once we get sewing and flattening everything on with the iron, it really does get a lot easier. It's just getting only the right layers lined up together to make that work. All right, see how I am not catching this on the other side? And I am going to make sure that that pleat, most linings have a center back pleat. I'm going to make sure that pleat is caught when I do sew that. So I'm going to put one more pin right there to hold that in place. Good. And now I'm going to set it over my ham like this and give myself a little gentle press there, because between the wool of the jacket and the felt wool of the collar, that's going to help us ease in to our new little home here, lower down on the back. Good. Okay, now we're ready to put another line of basting 1/4 inch up from the edge. That's what we originally had here, so that's what I'm going to go back and do again. And then we'll do a decorative hand stitch to close down the felt edge, as well as a pick stitch to close the inside of the collar. So this will be our last machine stitch, this little part, and then it's all hand sewing. Okay. As I'm sliding the collar under, I am holding the undercollar that is against the skin away, just like I was when I was pinning, so that as I get underneath here, I'm not catching it. Now, I'm starting at the left side shoulder. And like I said, I think we're going to do about 1/4 inch up, that straight stitch. And this doesn't need to be a really tight stitch here. Just remember, I'm probably going to do this at about a 2.5 stitch length. And I'm not going to, I'll do one back stitch. What the heck, right? And I'm constantly looking underneath to push the under collar aside. And I am certainly not going to run over any pins. This is really critical right here, because running over a pin is going to create an odd divot in the collar. And this is just a really complex fitting area of the garment. So we really want to make sure that all the areas that we run over are completely flat, smooth, straight. And I'm just running the felt right along the edge of my presser foot. I have a regular standard presser foot on, and that makes it pretty easy for me to keep really straight and uniform. And I'm really taking this few stitches at a time. I am actually moving this slow. That is okay. The other thing that I'm doing, it may be hard to see, but I'm actually using both my left and right hand to curve the collar in the direction that it wants to be curved, which is this way. It's curving off to the right because it's intending to be circling a neck. So I'm helping it by smoothing with both hands to try to hold it in the shape that it will be resting in its final resting place with my hands, because otherwise if I try to sew this in a straight line, it's going to fight me because it is not a straight line. Now, as we get close to that collar, that's when the fabric starts to get really kind of tight and those curves get tight. And so we're just trying to keep everything really smooth with our hands, our fingers, lifting the presser foot, smoothing the fabric. There's a lot to do, a lot to think about, and take this slow. Okay. Woo! Okay. Great. Good. Good, good, good. I can see that I didn't catch any of my undercollar. And now I'm ready to press this and pin down the inside so that we can get to that hand stitching. Perfect. Let's meet at the iron. Okay, we are back over the iron. And again, I've got my ham under here. This is a really interesting one. Anytime that I sit down, when I get to this part, I don't know why it's this part in particular, but when I get down to this part, I think it's because I know I have the hand sewing coming. And I think about the way that I learned to do this. This is a really crazy one because I personally could find no videos, no tutorials, nothing to show me how to do this really difficult, seemingly difficult procedure that is very visible on the garment. And so it's really scary to go, oh yeah, I'm just gonna rip that collar off and it's gonna go great. Said no one ever. And so to learn this procedure, I actually had the incredible good fortune to live down the street from a tailor that was wildly talented for so many reasons, but Mr. Ray, he is a local guy, and he is a concentration camp survivor. So he learned to sew. He learned to sew at Auschwitz and Dachau. And he told me about that when he was teaching me to do this. Because I asked him too many questions, and he said, no, you just listen. Just watch and just listen. No, but what if you do this? But what if I do this? No. How are you going to do this? That's what I asked him. I said, how are you going to do this? And he kept giving me the same answer, and it would frustrate me. He would just say, I'm going to do it with my hands. And I'm like, yes, I know that. But what about where it meets with the shoulder? And what about the stitch to put it? And he's like, you aren't listening. I'm going to do it with my hands. And that really is all that he told me. And then I watched him do it with his hands, and he did. But I guess the meditation in that, or the learning in that was, I think the point was, there aren't shortcuts. There is no secret. There's nothing more to it than we all live by the work that we do with our hands, all of us, no matter what our circumstances, and certainly for him. He was the only surviving member of his family. Because he had a skill, he said, if you have a skill, you will survive. That was what he told me. And that was true for him. So I always think of him when I do this. Anyway, okay, all right. We are pressed and ready to sit back down at the table. I'm molding this as it's warm with my hands to smooth out some of the wrinkles and again, help ease it into that new curve. Good. Awesome. All right, let's take our ham and head on back over. So you can see here, this is the inside of the jacket, and I have pinned the undercollar, the section of the collar that sits against the skin, down onto the jacket, and I'm going to reset this by pick stitching. Now, you can kind of see the stitching that line that I put in on the outside, and after I put this pick stitching back in and my stitching on the outside, I may decide to take that out. Often after it's done, I like the idea of just the hand stitching being in there because I think it looks beautiful and refined. So we will decide after we finish. So I'm holding it with my hand in place, but I also have my couple of pins here. I've got a single strand of skein doubled over. And what I'm going to do is, I've got that knot you just saw me slide under there. I'm going to make sure that I've got that tucked up underneath. And then I'm going to go down and grab a bit down there and come up again. And as you can see, it's going to look like just a little pick. And if I can follow, ooh, I'm going to need my thimble to push through all of these different layers of fabric. So why don't I get that out of my pocket real quick? Ooh. Yeah, there we go. And I wear that on my middle finger here, and it's got this nice little whip, you see? That's what's going to help me push that needle through all of those layers of fabric, because there are quite a few. Now the key here is trying to keep the space in between our stitches uniform. So not only are we trying to make sure that we pick up every layer, but we're also trying to keep that uniform and pretty. Yeah, there we go. I really love a good pick stitch. It's not as common anymore in suits and, mass-produced clothing, but it is a lot of fun, especially if you decide to go with a contrast color thread. That can be really fun. Often on nice suits, you'll see maybe a light pink or a light blue as a contrast stitch. Now, in this case, of course, like I said, this is a tuxedo, so the black is really the right call on this one. But even so, what's cool is that it keeps this stitching so subtle that you'd have to be very close to him to get to see it. And I like that. I like those kind of very subtle details, almost your own little secret. Maybe only you know. Great. Good. And I just want to take a look back. I am going to give this a press after I'm done, of course, but I just want to keep an eye on it and make sure everything is looking beautiful. And I'm going barely 1/8 of an inch from the edge of that undercollar. Oop, that was a little too far. There we go. And I'm spacing my stitches, my picks, about 1/4 inch apart. And that's kind of standard, but honestly, as long as it's uniform, it's right. So your goal is to securely be picking up all of the layers and keeping all the threads smooth and tight, and then getting that really good spacing. So see, when I pull it a little bit too tight, you'll notice that I will, if I pull it too tight like that, I'll smooth it back out when I bring my hand back down and try to keep that really smooth and uniform, because we don't want to inadvertently gather the fabric. Great, almost there, coming up to the end. Perfect. And then I'm using this thumb of my left hand right over here against the fingers of my left hand underneath to hold all of the layers of the collar smooth and flat. And see how you may see a little bit of that machine stitching from before? That's probably, I may take out that little bit of it. That'll be fine because I do have this stitching here to hold it all in place. Good, great, okay. And now I'm going to pick up the littlest bit of thread here and tie as small of a little knot as I can. And then slide my needle back through so that I can try to pull that knot under the fabric. Ooh, there we go. Okay, cool. Great. And snip that off right there. Perfect. Awesome. All right, now, before I go to press, I am going to flip it over and finish off that felt. Okay. All right, I've got my same, I think that I've got enough. I really want to do this in one run of thread. I don't want to have to knot it off in the middle. So do try to gauge it because that's what will make it look the prettiest, is if you're able to do it all in one pass. So I'm over here at the shoulder seam again, coming up under so that my knot is tucked under the edge there. And then traditionally, you're going to use either a whip stitch really close to the edge, which is my preferred method, or a blanket stitch. But I'm not a big blanket stitch fan. I don't know. I think maybe it's just the aesthetic, really, honestly. But I'm taking these small diagonal stitches that you can barely see. And I do want to make sure that I don't catch the lining over here. So I do have my hand underneath so that I can make sure that I'm feeling that the needle is only going through the suit jacket outer and the felt versus all the way in through the lining because I don't want additional puckers there. Great. So again, I'm kind of running the thread diagonally from the opening and then running it diagonally back again up through the felt. And here we are coming up to the center back seam again. And I do want to grab enough of that chunk of felt so that we get a good bite there and that thread doesn't just slide right out. Go. Ooh, it's going to be close. I can tell with the amount of thread that I have. I'm hopeful. And I'm just taking a moment to smooth that and look at those stitches and make sure that I like them. And I do. I am really happy with those. And we'll just keep this party rolling all the way over to the other left side shoulder. This should be, I honestly probably don't even need this thimble on right now because this should be much easier going than the inside. With the pick stitch, we were picking up a lot more layers of fabric. With this one, we are not. We're just picking up that outer and that felt. So it should be smoother going. I am keeping the spacing the same, about a 1/4 inch apart, just like I did on the inside, even though that was a pick stitch and this is a little whip stitch. But again, it's not the type of stitch. It's really the uniformity, the consistency of spacing. That is your most important factor here in making this look beautiful and professional. So take your time, work slow, This is a really meditative one. This is a really real, true, deep down tailoring. I do like it. I really enjoyed this. Great. Almost there. And there we go. And then I am going to go, even though I have some of that remaining stitching from previous, I'm just going to overlap a bit all the way to that shoulder seam, just to keep it all nice and clean. And I'm going to smooth that out a little. Good. Okay. And then again, one small knot, keeping it very, very small. And then slide the tails back through the felt to hide them. Great. All right, let's give it one more press. Take our ham and head on over to the iron. I like it. I like it. I like it. Okay. As always, got my ham underneath there. And for me, this is a procedure that I'm going to use my hands a lot for. The wool is so wonderfully susceptible to this hot, hot steam. And so I'm going to burn my palms a little. But see, even the clapper, Tailor's clapper, does not really work for me in this case because I want the curve of my own hands on the curve of this shoulder like that. That's how I'm shaping it. That's why I want to touch it this way when it's hot, because I feel that that's the way to get the most genuine shape, personally, just me. And then I'm going to move my ham over to the other side and do the same thing. I'm not pressing them both at once. I'm pressing each one individually. And I'm not crushing this. I'm not crushing that. I'm running the edge of my iron on the edge that I was sewing. It's all pressing with this one. Hands sewing and pressing. Okay, now let's roll our collar back. Good. I'm going to sit it up and look at it, which I like. Yeah, I like the way that that's looking. And then now I'm going to do a little bit of gentle press on the collar itself, and I'm kind of standing it up like this because this doesn't lay flat, remember? It sets up against the neck. So we don't want to press it flat. We want to press it where it goes, where it belongs. That's nice. I like that. Okay. Okay. Cool. Love it. Boy. And then I'm going to give a teensy little gentle, quick press inside there, but careful not to flatten this. Really just getting that pleat and getting this curve that I want to feel and make sure. Yep. Giving that a little bit of heat. That's nice. Great. Love it, love it, love it. Beautiful. Awesome. Alrighty, folks. Thanks for joining me on this one. Or more importantly, thank Mr. Ray.